Okay, this is going to be a video tutorial about inner VLAN routing and also why we need VLANs. So first of all, we need routing when we have more than one network. So in this scenario right here, we've got a router and we have two networks. There's the network on the left and the network on the right. And each network is attached to the router on an interface, right? And let's say we need two networks in this organization because we have students and faculty that we want to put on one network, and we want them to be separate, right, from the administration and the staff, which we want to have on a separate network, right? So that makes sense. We have two networks and we have one on one side and one on the other. And in this scenario though, we have no VLANs. So if you're students and faculty, you're going to need to connect to this switch, which is then going to connect to the router, and this is all the one student and faculty network, right? Now, of course, we could add additional switches here and add additional computers, but essentially, this is going to all be students and faculty. And then over here, on this switch, also, there's no VLANs on this switch. So if you're on the 20 network over here, you're administration and staff, and you need to connect to this switch. And if we need more room, we could add more switches to connect to switch to switch to switch, add more hosts. But essentially, you're going to need to connect basically to this switch, right, in this scenario here, which then connects to this router and then goes to the internet. Okay, so this is a scenario that has multiple networks. It needs routing between the networks because we actually want them to be able to communicate in sometimes across, right? So, but this is a scenario where you have no VLANs, right? Okay, so let's look at another scenario. So in the scenario down here though, right, now let's pretend that we have, let's say, a 5-story building. Okay, so floor 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We've got a 5-story building, right? And now we have VLANs. So now what we've decided to do is put the students and faculty on VLAN 10, right, for the 10 network, and we've going to put administration and staff on VLAN 20. But now, since we can VLAN the switches, right, we can have either network, right, either the 10, right, either the 10, the pink VLAN 10 for the students and faculty, or VLAN 20, the 20 network, right, both can attach to the same switch, right? So now, you know, if we want to put a, let's say, a faculty office on the 5th floor, but we need to have a faculty office on the 1st floor because this faculty member is afraid of heights, then they can do it and attach to this switch because it's VLANed off. So this is a scenario where VLANs help out. Now, to make this work though, we can no longer have these switches attaching to a router in the center because the router has two interfaces for two networks, and we want the 10 network and the 20 network to exist on both sides. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that router in the center here, right? And we're going to replace it with, in this model, a switch, right? So there we go. So now you have a switch, and then in between the switches we put trunks. So we'll say, okay, port 1, let's say to port 1, and then crossover cable here, say port 1, and in this case it's going to have to go to the next available port, let's say port 2. So then, so now we have switch to switch to switch, and now what we'll do is we'll put our router at the bottom, generic router, let's say at the bottom, there we go, and we'll attach a straight through cable from the router's, let's say, fast Ethernet 0 to this switch interface. We'll go to interface 5, and we can turn on that port just to make it look good. Alright, so now it's on. So now we have all of these switches basically going to this router, right? And we have all of these networks, and so we have essentially in this scenario what we'd call a router on a stick, or basically all of these networks attached to the router on one interface. And in reality what we'd probably need to do is this router would then attach to an internet service provider device, which we could just say is like another router here, or some DCE device, right? and then this would connect to this, and we'll use, let's say, a serial connection for that. We'll say serial 2 to serial 2, so there's our serial connection to the ISP, and then the ISP would, let's say, go to the internet, right? And we'll do that. Let's see what devices we can attach to here. Serial, alright, that's fine. And we'll say okay, so there we go. So there is our network attached to our router, and then attached to an ISP, which is then attached to the internet. So here's our network in the building, and here's our router on a stick, because all of these networks attach to the router on one interface. So this would be a scenario which would be a lot more flexible, because now we can have the benefit of multiple networks, right? But we can attach these hosts on these multiple networks to any of these switches on any of these floors, and we have greater flexibility in the physical location also, and the logical location. So how do you route between two separate VLANs, or which is two separate networks, across a switch, right? Switch to switch to switch, and then switch to router just over one interface. How do you route to two separate VLANs or two networks across one interface? Okay, well, if we go down here, we can see that I've turned it upside down a little bit, and there's two ways to do this, right? So in this scenario, what I've got is I've got, let's say, VLAN 10, VLAN 20, and VLAN 30, and this guy's 192.168.10.100 and 20.100 and 30.100, right? And so one way to do it is to set up the VLANs on the switch ports, and then have each VLAN, a port for each VLAN, going to a router, and your router is going to need to have three interfaces, right? So FA01, 02, and 03, so you're going to need a router with three Ethernet interfaces, and then you'd assign the router the IP address, let's say 10.1, 20.1, and 30.1. So now 10.1, right, on the yellow VLAN can communicate to 10.1 interface on the router, and he can reach his gateway. So this would be kind of a traditional model. The problem with this model is you need a router that now has three Ethernet interfaces, and now you've got to use up three interfaces on your switch, wasting basically interfaces. Or you could use this model, which is a little bit like this model, just turned upside down, you know, one router to a switch, and that is it's the router on a stick model. So now the router is on a stick, and the stick is a trunk, and it's going to the switch, and so you've got the three VLANs just like over here, right? You've got VLAN 10, VLAN 20, VLAN 30, right? But now all three VLANs are going across the trunk port to the router, and instead of having three interfaces on the router, all you have is sub-interfaces. So you can see here I put FA00.10, so that's sub-interface 10, and FA00 sub-interface 20, and FA00 sub-interface 30, and on each one of these sub-interfaces you can have an IP address. So he can be 10.1, 20.1, and 30.1, all on the same interface. Now this idea of sub-interfaces, you can actually even do this on your own computer. A lot of people don't realize that you can create sub-interfaces just on your own NIC, your Ethernet port, right on your own computer. So for instance, if I open up, let's say, my network connections, right? So here's control panel, network and internet, network connections, right? And I go to my Ethernet NIC, right? And I have it unplugged right now. And also, you can see that if I was to go in here, and I could just go to TCP/IP version 4 and go to properties, right? And you can see I'm set for DHCP and all this. But what if, right? What if we did like this, right? We say like that, and then we clicked advanced, right? And then you realize that now, right? So I said I'm going to manually configure my IP address, right? And So I can put in manual IP address settings, and I clicked advanced, and you can see that I could actually add multiple IP addresses to my NIC, right? So I could have address 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, and have sub interfaces right on the NIC, right on my own computer, right? And a lot of people don't really realize that you could do this, that you could have sub interfaces on the NIC right on your computer, right? It's just not something that they ever realize. So anyway, I'll reset this, close this out. So that's what's basically just happening here, is that you're setting sub interfaces on your router so that it can have 3 IP addresses instead of just 1, right? And then you've got the trunk going across to the switch, which carries traffic from all 3 VLANs. So let's configure this up really quickly right here.